Would Lane Kiffin actually quit on his Ole Miss team to take the Florida or LSU job before the playoffs?
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, the most watched Ole Miss podcast out there. I'm your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member as well. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in America, all thanks to you. On today's show, we're going to break down the potential fallout if Lane Kiffin decides to stay or go in his job right now and what damage might need to be repaired inside the program as well. There's a good bit to clean up that they've been pretty destructive with. Next, we will talk about why Athletic Director Keith Carter deserves a statue for how he's protected Ole Miss through all of this. It's all going to come out. It should be very interesting to see the reaction to all of that. But first, the big question that everyone's asking, would Lane Kiffin actually walk away from Ole Miss before the college football playoff? Make no mistake, if he's not on the sideline for any reason, that is quitting on your team. And it's the $90 million guaranteed question. And we'll get into all of that. All of this and more on today's Locked On Ole Miss podcast. Remember, we're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. And a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make this show what it is. Your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if that bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download that app today. So we did a show yesterday about taking Lane Kiffin at his word and that the playoffs were the one thing that he was looking forward to and all of that stuff. How important that game would be to Lane Kiffin. And that is where a lot of my opinion has been developed from, knowing that Lane Kiffin wants to coach that game as a head coach more than anybody else. He is a hyper, super competitive dude. He wants to be a head coach in that game, lining up against Marcus Freeman or Mario Cristobal or whoever in a college football playoff type environment. He wants to be Nick Saban. So based off of that, my opinion was that that is going to be his guiding light through all of this. He was going to coach in that game. And so we did a video on it based off of that. And I believed that that game was the end-all be-all that I thought it was. You didn't have to worry about anything until at least January. Because Ole Miss is likely going to play December 19th and 20th. They're likely going to play then on January 1st or 2nd. And then after that, who knows what happens? Whatever's going on there, you can get it figured out. Well, I started listening to some of the podcasts from around the other schools, the Alley Peak podcast from Florida, Locked On LSU, Matt Moscona, the Chase and Neil podcast, the Spirit Bend podcast. And you started to put it together and it was like, wait a second. I literally think he might quit on his team. He might literally quit on his team. And that is so interesting. And everybody might point out, it's like people take coaching jobs all the time, or why won't he be allowed to coach on the sideline? No team is going to have a conference rival get all of the commercial pub from that game and have their coach on the sideline. I think it was Bo Schembechler said something about Michigan men only are going to coach our teams, not Arizona State or whoever's coach. And it's created a potentially unprecedented position in college football. And yeah, cool thing that Lane Kiffin becomes kind of the face of that, essentially, but it is what it is. And if Lane Kiffin quits, which, make no mistake, he would quit. The ball is in Lane's court because Keith Carter did something that was absolutely unbelievable. I think, personally, this is my opinion, that Lane Kiffin was going to try and have his cake and eat it too, which means he is feeding Keith Carter just enough information to keep Keith happy, lies about what's going on, keeps it quiet, coaches the playoff game. So he gets to have his cake and eat it too. And it makes sense that Lane Kiffin thought he could get away with that because Keith Carter and nobody else has said no to him for the better part of the last 6 years. So, of course, he thought he could get away with it. But Keith Carter, to the surprise of everybody, and I've heard this from multiple different places, Keith Carter put an ultimatum on Lane Kiffin to where he had to sign the extension by a certain time. And the deadline of that is there's 24 hours each direction on that, if you want to go into that. Or he would get fired and would not be allowed to coach in the playoffs. If, for any reason, Lane Kiffin takes a job at Florida or LSU, if he took a job there tomorrow, he would not be allowed to coach in the Egg Bowl. Keith Carter has drawn a line in the sand and said, this is what we're going to do. And this is how it's going to happen because we can't let you string us along like you were obviously planning on doing. Now, is there a chance he could end up back at Ole Miss? Yeah, absolutely. But with this deadline, you've got a rush of kind of going through the job search in a hurry. Stuff that is normally quiet, that they keep under wraps, is now out in the open, just unbelievably out in the open. Lane Kiffin's family going down to Gainesville and touring a high school. Lane Kiffin's family down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I think currently as I record. All of that gets done under wraps if it's a normal coaching search. But that lets you know exactly how serious Lane Kiffin is in regards to getting out of Ole Miss. Now, the rumor is Florida has a Godfather level offer for Lane Kiffin, like 6 years, $15 million per year, $90 million guaranteed on the table. Boom. Can't say no. It's Jimbo Fisher level contract. Florida's doing it 3 years after Jimbo is no longer there. And if they're down in LSU right now, you've got a bidding war that's about to start. If that $15 million per year, $90 million guaranteed, I guarantee you it's $15.5 and $95 million guaranteed. They're going to end up spending $20 million for Lane Kiffin, a coach, by the way, that if he takes one of those jobs, still will not have coached a college football playoff game. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And I credit Keith Carter for being the person with the Ole Miss interests at heart. He did an excellent job of looking out for Ole Miss throughout all of this, through all of the games, the trolling. You had boosters coming out talking about Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin's got some serious damage repair to do if he decides to keep his job. But it increasingly looks like he's kind of burnt that bridge, and it almost feels like he's trying to burn that bridge, if it makes sense. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the show. We'll talk about Keith Carter's ultimatum and how that kind of came about, and what will Ole Miss do for the next head coach if Lane Kiffin leaves. We'll talk about that as well. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine those live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at an even bigger payout. It helps keep everything exciting, especially when your team is making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when that first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com and sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Do us a favor, like, subscribe, and comment on the video. Subscribe to the podcast on whichever audio podcast you're listening to it on, and give it a 5-star review. It costs absolutely nothing, but it helps keep all of this free. Locked On is getting ready to change the game yet again, all in the name of having fun following your team. It's coming in December. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network out there in America. That's all because of you, and thank you for that. So I mentioned Keith Carter having an excellent search. If you want to, anytime the situation, the weirdness is going to happen with Lane Kiffin essentially quitting on his football team and moving on to another job, because the reality of this situation is Keith Carter did something absolutely brilliant from what I hear. And that is, he put this ultimatum on Lane Kiffin, which meant the onus went from Keith Carter to figure out what was going on, because obviously they were planning a Tommy Tuberville type like exit from Ole Miss, to Ole Miss kind of putting the spotlight on inside the Manning Center and also making the decision 100% sitting at the feet of Lane Kiffin. That's what this ultimatum did. Lane Kiffin has to decide, is $15 million a year and $90 million guaranteed worth the knowledge that he is going to quit on his football team right before the college football playoff? Because the option of coaching is not there. Him standing on the sideline after he is the head coach of Florida or LSU, that is not a possibility at all. So him deciding to take that job is deciding to walk away from that playoff game. Lane Kiffin, will he quit on his football team? That is the $50 million question, the $90 million question, the $20 million a year question, because I do think with Florida and LSU bidding, it's going to get into a bidding war. They're obsessed, and Lane's going to get paid. But Keith Carter having the foresight to pull something like that off. First, you do the fantastic offer that Lane said he liked, he had no problem with. He's ready to go. It's just going to be announced at a little bit later date. Okay, whatever. That was the plan. This offer that was out there, waiting on it to happen, Lane was working behind the scenes, doing all of the stuff that football coaches and all of that does. Keith Carter, knowing that you need to set this ultimatum to say the Sunday after the Egg Bowl or the Saturday after the Egg Bowl, the extension has to be signed and you locked into Ole Miss or you're gone. It's over. We'll wipe the hands clean. It'll be fine. We'll insert Joe Judge as the interim head coach. We will let Pete Golding and Charlie Weis Jr. do what they do. And we'll go out and find the next football coach, because we have the money and everybody knows we have the money to pay extremely well. And we'll talk in the next segment a couple of names that might be out there, not necessarily a hot board or anything like that, but a couple of names, and somebody that I'm interested in as an emergency break glass type character. Because if all of this goes down the way that some want it to go down, I mean, they're quitting on their team, it's something like that. If they do that, you probably want to be prepared. And Ole Miss has the search firm on retainer. They're probably already vetting candidates as we speak, even though they don't have an open job. Contacts, they probably have already talked to 2 or 3 head coaches that know exactly what's going on. They know the timeline. They know what's going to happen. And the proactiveness of Keith Carter, along with taking the blame game off of Ole Miss and putting it on Lane Kiffin, was a masterstroke. It was amazing. And I think this has a chance to be weird. I mean, it does. I mean, you have a chance where a coach that made it through the regular season, or most of it, I'm not even sure at this point if he's going to coach the Egg Bowl game. It's everything is so fluid and up in the air right now. I don't know. But will he coach the Egg Bowl game? Okay, if yes, will he coach the playoff? And that depends on that extension that is signed, 2 days or 3 days after the Egg Bowl. We'll see. I do know that Florida has made him a Godfather deal. And by the way, $15 million a year for 6 years and $90 million guaranteed. That is not a our school is better than your school offer. That is our school is desperate and willing to pay offer. That's what that is. So we'll see exactly how that goes. I'm impressed with Keith Carter. He is getting close to, if an athletic director deserves a statue, he's getting close to that point. Now, Lane, if he does decide to stay at Ole Miss, if all of this is over and he decides to return to Ole Miss so he can coach the playoffs, if it's one of those situations to where he gets more attention from coaching the playoffs than from the way he leaves, I think there's a decent chance that he ends up coaching the playoffs. But if he coaches that, he has some damage to repair. 2 months ago, Lane Kiffin could do whatever he wanted. He owned the city of Oxford. His kids were treated like royalty. His family was treated amazingly. Everybody knew them. Juice Kiffin was a star. Now, it would be difficult to get not just a free lunch somewhere around Oxford, but to actually get in and eat something somewhere around Oxford. It's going to get cold. It's going to get frigid in that city. And that is because of the way this went down. This kind of feels, you can look around at it, this kind of feels like if you caught what Tommy Tuberville was doing 3 or 4 days before he did it. That's what it feels like. Not saying it is, that's what it feels like. It feels like you're getting played a little bit. So we will see exactly how it goes. Is Lane quitting? I don't know. I do know that there's a Godfather offer out there from Florida. Ole Miss has an offer on the table for him as well. And LSU probably has something comparable to the Florida offer in hand. And there's a chance of a bidding war going up between LSU and Florida. That I know. What I don't know is what's most important for Lane Kiffin. Where would he like to be? What does he need to be successful? Because the reality of this is, I don't think that he knew or knows how good he had it at Ole Miss or has it at Ole Miss. I don't think he knew or knows. I think he's about to find out. And if you want the Florida job so bad, just wait 3 years. It'll be open again. And you could have had 3 more years of a playoff run to work with. It's interesting. It's stupid. We'll see exactly how it goes. But Lane Kiffin, if he takes the LSU or the Florida job, he's quitting on his team before the playoffs. The college football world will absolutely react to that appropriately. I guarantee it, except for Florida fans or LSU fans, wherever he ends up. Everybody else is going to vilify him. And essentially, Lane is back to 2009 Lane. And this is like 2 months, not even 2 months, less than 2 months since that documentary released talking about how he did not want to be 2009 Lane. That is funny. That is kind of hilarious. And we'll see exactly what happens because it's going to be interesting over the next couple of weeks. I'm sorry, this is a little bit of a stream of consciousness on podcast of what's going on, but I'm just sitting here talking to you. Just kind of letting you know how I feel and reacting, not necessarily in real time, but it's still kind of fresh with everything that's going on. So we'll talk about that. In the last segment, when we come back, we will talk about potential replacements should Lane Kiffin end up at LSU or Florida. All of that coming up next. All right, the rumors came out today pretty hot and heavy, pretty quick. Honestly, Lane Kiffin's family's in Baton Rouge, touring Baton Rouge at the moment. That was reported by Matt Moscona. Sunday, they were down in Gainesville touring schools. They're legitimately looking around. They are absolutely looking around, and that is not the action of a coach that is intending on staying put. Like I said, props to Keith Carter. Keith Carter did a fantastic job, and he has Ole Miss in the best possible state they can be in. But this is very tough for Ole Miss dealing with, because right now you can't even start a search because he hasn't even decided. This is basically, do you remember LeBron's decision when he chose to go from Cleveland to Miami and how everybody just kind of rolled their eyes and laughed at it? Well, this is that on steroids. But Keith Carter putting the ultimatum on Lane Kiffin, that actually helps Ole Miss, because if Lane does not sign the contract, instead of it being drawn out until January or whenever that, you're going to go ahead and sever it. You're going to find the next guy. I think Ole Miss might have the next guy pretty lined up, if we're going to be completely honest. And I think the number one candidate for the job, bar none, would be Jon Sumrall, the head coach of Tulane. Now, Jon Sumrall is pretty far down the road with Auburn at the moment. So you're kind of playing that Auburn and Ole Miss stuff with what's going on. But I was told today that if any job came open, he would prefer the Ole Miss job. And that makes sense, but that also brings in some problems that we need to talk about as well. Now, I think some of the message boards on 3 and the 247 board, they're all talking about potential coaches that could go and potential coaches that could stay. I mean, Kevin Smith obviously is a go because he's the coach that came up from Florida Atlantic. I think Wes Neighbors, I think John Garrison, I think all of his stuff that's in his direct tree is definitely a candidate to go with him to Florida or LSU, or if he decides to do whatever. But if Jon Sumrall gets the head coaching position, what does that mean for Pete Golding? Because generally a defensive head coach wants a defensive coordinator that is basically just a parrot. The person that is the head coach is going to do most of the work. It's kind of like Lane Kiffin got credit for the offense at Ole Miss, and Charlie Weis Jr. got credit for the mistakes. Be the same thing on the defensive side of the ball. So I don't know if Pete is necessarily going to survive that. So Pete could end up going down to Florida. He could end up at another job, maybe a head coach at a G5 level. I'm not 100% sure on that. I think B. Brown, though, has the potential to be the defensive backs coach and the defensive coordinator, with Jon Sumrall coming in as well. I for whatever reason, I think there's a chance there. I'm curious to see about Randall Joyner and see what they do there. Offensively, that's going to be pretty weird, honestly. But Ole Miss needs to figure out a way to retain like Joe Judge, if they can, to keep Trinidad Chambliss if he gets the year of eligibility, or Austin Simmons, get them to keep around. Kejuan Lacey, get him to stay around as well. If that happens, you will probably be in as good a shape as you could be in, if we're going to be completely honest. But the number one candidate would be, in my opinion, Jon Sumrall. The secondary thing that's kind of interesting to me that you need to think about is the thing that we're talking about in the interim set. And that's the head coach of Joe Judge and potentially the defensive coordinator of Pete Golding, to where a lot of stuff stays the same, essentially. And if Ole Miss can do that, they're going to be all right with all of the apparatuses that they've put together inside of the Manning Center. The emergency break glass candidate for me, and this is just my opinion, would be Jimmy Rogers, the head coach at Washington State. And I don't know if he would leave that early with what's going on, but he's a really good football coach. Everybody saw what Wazoo did when they came down to Oxford and how they played and how hard they went at it. He put together a little bit of a dynasty with South Dakota State. He was the Jackrabbits legend. So that is a name that I would keep an eye on. Now, like I said, this is all if Lane Kiffin takes the money and runs to Florida or LSU. I think these are the directions that Ole Miss is potentially looking at. And if it happens, obviously I'll be leaning on several people with what's going on in a coaching search, and use the subtext link, and we'll be dropping the All Access program by about that time and all of that. But I wanted an episode to kind of talk about what's going on right now. Like I said, it's the Godfather offer, $15 million a year over 6 years, that's ridiculous money. That's $2 million a year more than Kirby Smart makes, roughly. And Ole Miss probably, I don't know if they should go that high. Hire a coach for $7 million and put an extra $8 million in NIL. And you have like a $15 million NIL pot and you go out and sign whoever you want to. Something like that. But man, $15 million, that's a lot of money. That is a lot of money. So we'll see exactly how that goes. Anyway, thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the front door of Ole Miss. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. It helps the show, and it's absolutely free. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC. Chris Gordy breaks down the best conference in college sports, from the rivalries to the championship and every game in between. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Howdy toddy, everybody. And remember, analytics is just the old English word that means bad football. We'll see you tomorrow.